Hey, Eric here, and I'm going to take some time this morning to give you some feedback on writing prompt number 8. So this was the case study of Jill and Nate in the peer review, and specifically you were asked to pick either the first formulation of the categorical imperative or the second formulation of the categorical imperative and do an analysis, right? Suggest to Jill how she should solve the dilemma based only on either the first or the second formulation of the categorical imperative. So I entered grades for that writing prompt this morning. I left some personal feedback for each of you, but really what I suggested was that you watch this feedback where I'm going to talk in general about what I saw and give you some tips. I've mentioned this several times since this is the third set of feedback that I've left you on Kant and deontology. Essay number 2 that's coming up will really ask you to apply both of the formulations of the categorical imperative to a case study. And so you're going to want to be sure that you're comfortable with both formulations, understanding what they are, and specifically being able to paraphrase them in your own words, right? Assuming that someone reading a letter that you're going to write won't have read Kant, won't know what the words categorical imperative mean. So you're going to want to be able to translate these theories into regular English, I guess we could call it. So anyway, here it goes. I'm going to talk about the first formulation first and the second formulation second. There were a few really strong analyses. There were lots that were pretty good, but maybe I'd say not as thorough as they could have been or insufficient. And then there were a few that were a little bit off base because I thought some of your own ideas were kind of bleeding into what Kant has to say. So let's just jump right in with the first formulation of the categorical imperative. So first of all, let me address some misconceptions that I saw. First of all, don't mention outcomes or consequences. So again, it's not that Kant wants bad things to happen, and it's not that he doesn't care about good things happening, but when Kant is analyzing a moral problem, he doesn't think that looking at the potential consequences, good or bad, that's just not relevant to determining whether the thing is moral or immoral. So when you're doing a Kantian analysis, every time you're tempted to talk about consequences, just stop, right? They're probably relevant to you, they're probably relevant to most of us, but for Kant, they're not. And so when you're doing Kantian analysis, you just want to avoid talking about consequences. Or you could even say, consequences won't be relevant to this analysis. Second, the first formulation is not the same thing as the golden rule. They're similar. Again, it probably depends on exactly what you mean by the golden rule, but they're not exactly the same. And here's the basic reason why. The golden rule says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? More or less what? Treat others with the same kind of respect that you would want them to treat you with. I think underlying that is the basic idea that we're all equal and we should respect each other. And that's really what Kant is talking about, right? We owe everyone full moral respect due to their moral worth, their inherent moral worth that they have because they are a rational entity with free will who is capable of making moral choices, right? Who could be moral or immoral, who has the capacity to value things as morally good or morally bad. But the golden rule in and of itself has too much subjectivism built in, right? Treat others as you would want to be treated. Well, then that means you should have to think about your own personal desires about how you want to be treated. And Kant doesn't think your own desires are relevant when we're talking about morality. For him, it's always based on reason. Stay focused. So I saw some of these analyses straying away from what Kant was saying to what I think you want to say, or maybe what you think Kant wants to say. But just be really careful not to stray behind the very basics of what Kant is talking about when you're doing a Kantian analysis. It is true that any time you're asked to review someone's writing, you're being asked for your opinion. Now, in a peer review, you're probably being asked for your reasoned opinion about the quality of the work within the context of the writing assignment and the particular class. It's true that different people like different things. But when someone asks you for your opinion, they're still asking you for the truth, right? The true judgment that you have about the quality of the writing. So, yes, it's an opinion, but it's still wrong to lie if someone asks for your opinion, right? They know your opinion is subjective. but they still want to know the truth. So you can't lie about it. So what did I see in the best analyses of the first formulation of the categorical imperative? So this applies to the second formulation as well. You will be asked to summarize and to some degree interpret what Kant is saying. You want to apply his thinking to a case study. But when you're interpreting Kant, just stay as close as you can to those core ideas that he's talking about it. So what are they? Human beings are moral entities. That is, human beings have moral rights. We have moral responsibilities and duties. We are capable of being moral or immoral, right? We have the capacity to value things or not value them. And we can only do those things because we can reason and because we have free will, right? Those are the things that allow us to even, I'll say, do morality. Since reason and free will create the capacity to be moral, Kant thinks that these are the two things that are how we're equal, right? These things, reason and free will, give us our intrinsic moral worth, and this dignity that we have because we are morally capable entities is what makes us equal. So when Kant talks about people being equal, he doesn't mean we're equally strong or even equally smart. We're not equally physically fit or tall or short, but we're equal in the basic moral worth we have due to the fact that we have free will and we're rational entities. So, reason dictates that equal things be treated equally. When two things are equal, you can't treat one of them different than the other one without being illogical. So since each of us has equal moral worth, it is irrational to treat myself differently than I would treat you, right? I have to treat us both equally good, not based on my desires, but just based on what reason tells us. So, what is the first formulation of the categorical imperative? It follows directly from this line of thinking. I cannot rationally, logically follow a rule that I know it is impossible for everyone else to follow at the same time. Right? If I do that, I am making myself more important than you because I'm allowing myself to break a rule that I can only break because you're following it. Right? So, in this particular case, Jill can't lie because lying cannot be made into a universal law. If everyone lied, then there would be no such thing as the truth, and if there's no such thing as the truth, then lies can't exist. So trying to universalize lying is self-contradictory. It's illogical. It is literally impossible, right? It's not that universalized lying is bad because it is impossible to universalize lying, period. So since lies cannot be universal, Jill can't lie just because she wants to, right? She can't break this rule that everyone else has to follow. If we look specifically at peer reviews, we can see that if everyone always lied in peer reviews, this would undermine the entire purpose of doing the peer review in the first place. If everyone knew that they would get lied to on a peer review, the teacher would never assign it. And if the teacher never assigns it, then universalized lying in peer reviews is impossible. It is literally impossible to imagine a scenario where we universalize lying in peer reviews. It would cause the whole idea of a peer review to collapse on itself. One of you mentioned that Jill could say nothing and thus avoid lying. And I think that's true. Avoiding saying anything would be avoiding lying, but in this particular case, Jill has chosen to be in this class. She read the syllabus, she knows that writing classes involve peer reviews, so she has these kind of pre-existing relationships in place. So I think this is one of those cases where lying by omission is still a lie. And I think in a sophisticated Kantian analysis, Kant would say, Jill, saying nothing is better than lying to Nate, but you owe him the truth because you've already promised him the truth by the fact that you're in the class and you knew the class had peer reviews. There's no need to be brutally honest. You can be compassionate, but you can tell the truth, right? So I think that's the kind of thing I'm looking for in a first formulation analysis. So that's what I meant for many of you when I said you're on the right track, but not as thorough as you could have been, right? In the essay coming up, you're going to want to be as thorough as you can to really demonstrate your full comprehension of Kantian deontology. What about the second formulation? Again, don't focus on consequences, but also don't focus on Nate's feelings or anyone else's feelings. Kant doesn't care about your feelings. Feelings are subjective. Sometimes we have them, sometimes we don't have them. They're fickle, they're subjective. They're not the basis of morality. Again, it's not that Kant wants people to feel bad. He just doesn't think our feelings should drive our moral choices. What did I see in the best second formulation analyses? Again, they stayed really close to what Kant was talking about. I'm not going to reiterate these basic tenets of the first formulation and the second formulation. They're the same, but how is the second formulation derived from these facts about reason and free will? Well, if we're all moral equal because we all have free will and rationality, then it would be illogical and irrational to use a person merely as a means to some subjective end. Because that would mean that the thing that I want, my desire, is more important than the person that I'm using to get there. And that's impossible because we already just said that human beings, based on our inherent moral value, are the most important things in the universe. So how can a person's subjective whim... All right, sorry about that. My wife came home from yoga, and I think you heard my dogs barking in the background. So I sent my wife into her office for 5 minutes so I can finish this for you. So I was talking about second formulation of the categorical imperative, and this idea that because we're all moral equals and we're the most important things in the universe, it is illogical to think that there is some desire I have that is more important than a person who I would use and manipulate in order to attain that desire. So, all people, myself and others, deserve our full and equal moral respect as persons, right? Based on our rationality and free will. I should respect rationality and free will in myself and others because those are the traits that allow us to be moral entities and give us our moral worth in the first place. So, actively working to manipulate or undermine someone's free will or rationality is morally wrong. So, in this particular case, Jill has a moral duty to respect Nate's free will and rationality, right? He is a rational being, and this is what Jill should be respecting in him. Nate has asked Jill to offer an honest assessment of the quality of his writing and to give him some ideas to improve. And so Jill has a duty to follow through with this promise that she made, right? To participate in the peer review. Nate asked her for the truth. She has the obligation to give him the truth in this case. Yes, it might hurt Nate's feelings, but that is irrelevant. These are Nate's feelings. He made the choice to ask Jill for the truth. He knew that his feelings might get hurt. It is not up to Jill to override Nate's choice. He chose the value of the truth over his own feelings when he asked for the truth and he agreed to join the peer review. So by lying or choosing to say nothing, what is Jill doing? She's saying her judgment of what's best for Nate is more important than his own judgment, and that doesn't make any sense. Giving Nate the truth he asked for means that Jill is respecting Nate's rationality and free will, and she's allowing him to be capable of making free, informed choices about his own future, right? That's what we all want, the capacity to apply our free will and rationality to our own futures. And so by not manipulating him, Jill is putting Nate in a position to be able to exercise reason and free will. Jill does not need to be brutally honest. That's true. She can be compassionate and still be honest. If Jill chose to not tell Nate the truth, she would be using Nate only as a means to an end. Jill would be valuing her own desire to avoid confrontation, right, more than she valued Nate himself. She would be valuing her perception of Nate's feelings more than she's valuing Nate's status as an entity with free will. You know, there's all kinds of ways you could think about why she's using Nate or how she's using him. What is it that the end really is? It's her own desire to not have to have confrontation. It's her own desire not to feel bad herself. It's her own desire not to be in a situation where someone else is feeling bad. But in any case, if Jill lied, she's placing herself above Nate, right? She's assuming that she's the one who should be making judgments for him. You should also consider who else is being used possibly only as a means to an end. I think at least one of you pointed out that by lying, Jill is using herself only as a means to an end. She's undermining her own value as a writer. She's in this class also as a colleague, right? She has value her judgments are valuable, and by choosing to lie, she's also devaluing her own rationality and free will. She's probably also disrespecting the rest of the class, right? They're also in there to learn, not only by the peer review of their own papers, but by watching other students get their papers peer reviewed. So by lying, Jill is actually using the entire rest of the class. She's wasting everyone's time, including the professor. So when you're doing a second formulation analysis, it's definitely worth thinking, who are all the people who could potentially be being used only as a means to an end? All right, great work. Follow up with me this week. Use the open discussion, right? That's all we're doing this week in open discussion is trying to work on our analyses of the first formulation and the second formulation of the categorical imperative. Thanks a lot. Have a good week.